Okay, we might get started. We've got a lot to get through this morning. Good morning, my name is Kirsten Perris. I'm a library technician who works with the family history area as well as the researching area. I'll be talking first, and mine is the longer talk. Then we'll give you a 10-minute break, and then Saadia from State Archives will be talking to you. Okay, so we're researching convict ancestors. So basically what we want to do is familiarise you with the range of techniques and resources that are available for convict research in the State Library and the State Archives. And we want to just develop your awareness of some of the search strategies that can be used. So I just wanted to start off with where and when convicts arrived directly into Australia. So you've got that they basically came to New South Wales, Van Diemen's Land as it was known, Western Australia, Norfolk Islands, Port Phillip and Moreton Bay right at the end there. Moreton Bay was actually a penal settlement earlier, so reoffenders were sent there to do that. And that was earlier in the time period, but we had two convict ships that went directly to Moreton Bay. So, how to identify a convict? So first of all, you want to construct a timeline. So you want to make a note of all the dates, events that have happened that you can do. Trace the individual back through the birth, death and marriage indexes, establish when they first appear, so what's the first event that you can find them, check immigration records. From there, you might want to decide whether they were in Australia during the convict period. So if you can't find them coming in by immigration in that early time period, they may have been a convict. Some of the examples that I will be using today relate to two of the early Queensland pioneers whose obituaries do not refer to their previous life as a convict. So you've got to be aware that sometimes they hide that they're a convict, when in actual fact they were. One of the ways to find a convict is applications to marriage. Convicts who wanted to marry needed permission from the governor, and an application to marry will often include personal details about birth, both parties, even if one is not a convict, so it will actually say that they're free in the colony or something like that. There is an index available on the State Archives website, State Records website, and I've put that in the guide, the handout that I've given. We've also got a microfiche index, which is a more complete index, available at the Family History Desk on level 3, and we have the microfilm that those indexes refer to. So we do have material for early convicts in New South Wales. That's just an example. So you've got the name, age, the ship that they came out on. Then you've got sentence and whether they were free or ticket of leave, the date of application, and then the clergyman. So it gives you quite a bit of information there. And so if you find that, then you might find more. Another place to find whether a convict person was a convict is the musters. So these records place a person and or convict in a specific place and time. So there are a number of musters for New South Wales and Van Diemen's Land for that early, should be not 19th century, 18th century or earlier. And then you've got the New South Wales 1828 census is the most detailed. So we've got that in several formats. We have that on CD, we have it in a book format, we have it in various formats. There's also the Tasmanian census is available through their archives heritage online. So this is an example. This is The main one I was concentrating on was Thomas Dowse. He is an early pioneer of Queensland, and yet his obituary doesn't say that. It just says he spent so many years in New South Wales or came at this time period. So his ship was the Valencia. Oops. Hit the wrong button. And that's where he was residing. I included the next one underneath it just to give you the type of information that can be available. So the one below, you've got the GS is actually, he was a bond, so F is free, B is bond, and GS means he was a government servant. You've got the ship that, their sentence, their religion, occupation, where they might have been sent to. So although Thomas Dowse himself doesn't have a lot of information, this convict does. So censuses can provide you with quite a bit of information to lead you elsewhere. There are, at the front of the census book, there is a list of the abbreviations explained, but you can also find that on the CDs, etc. So that's just to give you an example. So the various sources you can check. So I've tried to do them in the order that you would do them if you're starting afresh. So you've got the Convict Transportation Registers, the Island Australia Transportation Database, census records, which we've covered, convict indents, and we're going to concentrate mainly on New South Wales, court and jail records, newspapers. You've also got things like Hulk registers, so when they've been sentenced over in the UK, they may not come to Australia straight away, so they may go into a Hulk. So that can be interesting too. You've got the prison commission records, surgeons' journals, which can provide you with a lot of information, paroles and pardons, the government gazettes once they've got to Australia, colonial secretaries' papers, and then there are other historical documents. So we're going to start with the Convict Transportation Registers. So they cover the period 1787 to 1867. It gives you about details on 123,000 of the 160, so not every convict will be in the database, but it's a good place to start. They're a part of the AJCP, which is the Australian Joint Copying Project. Now, these are records that are held by the British Archives that have been filmed for Australian, that relate specifically to Australian convicts and Australian management. You've got, so we've indexed them and you can search them on our website. You can also find them on Ancestry, so if you've got access to Ancestry, you can find them that way, and we subscribe to Ancestry. They will contain mainly English and Scottish convicts, and you're going to find many soldier convicts, so soldiers that were court-martialled in the West Indies, India. So that's also a thing to be aware of. So the index includes the name of the convict, including aliases, place of trial, term of years, place of arrival, and any other notes. This can be searched through our One Search catalogue and specifically selecting SLQ family history indexes. So this is an example. I've tried to piece the screen together because it looks quite big on my own screen. Oh. So this here, if you go to our One Search catalogue, you have to select the down arrow and then find SLQ family history indexes. Then I typed in his name, Thomas Dowse, clicked on details, and that's the information you get. It should be a complete of the information, but we do also have the originals if you were wanting copies of the originals. So the reference to that is, where are we? Is on there. I can't see it. Yeah. 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 So the information is there, and so we've got that information here. The The next thing is if you're looking for Irish convicts coming out. So you've got the database, the Irish Australia Transportation Database. This was created for 1988, the bicentenary. Mind blanks, doing well. Okay, so it's available through the National Archives of Ireland. We've got a link to it on our useful websites for family historians. I've also provided the direct link in the handout. It indexes records that we have on microfilm up on level 3. So there's a booklet available on level 3 that helps you with that index and what microfilm you need to view. And it covers 1788 to 1868. The other thing that you might want to consider, and I've again included the website on the handout, is that there's a website called Irish Convicts to New South Wales, 1788 to 1849, which can give you some real hints with searching your Irish convicts. Now I'm going to briefly cover both Van Diemen's Land and WA, and then we'll get into the New South Wales material. So Tasmanian Archives and Heritage Office have digitised many of their convict records and put them online. So you can search that through the Tasmanian Names Index, and that covers things like the convict permissions to marry as well as the convicts transported and convicted. So it includes both convicts transported to Van Diemen's Land as well as ones that were convicted locally. There are also there's a guide that gives you links to other websites, and you might want to check out a website called Founders and Survivors, which kind of tries to draw in all that information to do with Van Diemen's Land's convicts. And we have a number of other resources upstairs as well that have come from the Mitchell Library from Sydney, and that they are records that are held. WA was mostly in the 1850s to 68, so there is a database available through the Fremantle prison website, and I've given you again the direct link in the handout. The other thing that we have at the State Library is this Dictionary of Western Australians, and that can be useful in helping locate that convict background. New South Wales, convict indents. This is the best place to start because the majority of convicts came to New South Wales. So when you are looking, you need to start by searching the index to convicts who arrived in New South Wales. So 1788 to 1842. We have that here on microfilm up on level 3. And then that will lead you to the indents, which again we've got on microfiche. Now, these indents can also refer to other documents such as tickets of leaves, pardons, etc. So the indents are a muster of convicts on a particular ship, so like a immigration list almost. So it's done before the convicts disembark. So it's different to the convict transportation database, in that in the convict transportation database actually includes people that had their sentences commuted and didn't actually make it to Australia. So there's a bit of difference there. The indents are also available through Ancestry, which is a bit harder to search, so I find the index that we have much easier to guide you. Your indent is going to contain the name and ship, date and place of trial, and the sentence, which is the term of years. Between July 1848 and 1826, it starts adding a bit more detail. So native place, calling, which is their job, physical description. And then after 1826, you're going to get offence, former convictions, religions, marital status, that type of thing. So unfortunately, the earlier a convict came, it seems to be the less information is available to search for to begin with. So, but we've got other things that can be used to find the offence and that type of thing. So if you've got an earlier convict, we do have other records that can help you find that bit more information. This is what the index looks like. So what we've got highlighted there is Thomas Dowse. And What we have is, you can see that it mentions both fiche and film. What we have is actually the fiche, and that's the page number. So just be aware of that if you have a look at that. Staff at the microfilm desk will be able to help you. This is an example of the indent. So this was Thomas Dowse, and he arrived in 1828. So it's got, his name, age, education. If you see something that says DO, that means ditto. So you just need to refer back up until you find the reference to give you what you're looking for. So, for example, he has ditto next to his name, but it's R and W if you go further up, so he could read and write. Gives you his native place, which is Hackney. He was an errands boy. This was stealing in a dwelling house, and that he was tried in London. So that's ditto again, so you go up and find that. And then you've got his trial date, the physical description, and he was actually where he was disposed of, which means that he was going to this John Grosvenor Field or something like that. The other thing of interest we were talking about before, over here is a reference to a ticket of leave. So we know that he got a ticket of leave. I'm going to cover court and jail records first for those convicts that came to Australia earlier and you only get a sentence and you might get a trial place but you won't have anything else. This is a good place to then find out the offence. So the British records are assizes and quarter sessions, and then later we're going to talk about New South Wales court and jail records, which are for offenders. So assizes, they were held during Lent and summer, and they included like homicide, infanticide, theft for more than a shilling's worth, highway robbery, rape, assault, etc., etc. They will include name, occupation, abode, which is often the place of crime, rather than where they were living at time. Some of these records are going to be unreliable, and you get that with any records because of falsified names and details. So that's where aliases and things come into play. With the English court records available, the best place to check is the National Archives for Q, and you check which records are available for each county. So you can see with their guide, and I've given you the link to the guide, Criminal Trials in the English Assize Courts, that time period, there's a key to what records are available. There's also the Old Bailey online. So if you have a crime that was committed in London or Middlesex, or it is referred to the Central Crime Court, that's all going to be through the Old Bailey, which is located in London, and that's an online source, so we'll have a look at that in a minute. The other courts to be aware of are quarter sessions. So these were held 4 times a year, and they didn't hear most of the serious crimes or those involving life imprisonment or capital punishment, but you may find that there. And some of these quarter sessions we will have available through the AJCP in our miscellaneous series, and there's a handbook at the desk that can help you locate that. Also, there are some public record offices that have actually indexed their quarter sessions. So if you find that someone was trialled in Lincolnshire, you might be able to go to the County of Lincoln and find it there. So the Old Bailey, this is how you would search, and I've given you the direct link. So we were searching for Thomas Dowse, who came out in 1828 on the Florentia. So we find out that in actual fact, when we do a search, that he was tried in 1824, but didn't actually make it out here till 1828. So this is actually his trial here, and the interesting thing is that his mother turned him in. So He was only 15, I think, at the time. So whether she was trying to teach him a lesson or something else, it has been suggested that maybe she thought that he would have a better life over in Australia if he got transported. Who knows? Could she just been a mean mother? The interesting thing, as I said, is that he was trialled in 1824, didn't come out to 1828. So newspapers, they're a very good place to find reports of the crime, trial and punishment, transport arrivals for looking at Australian newspapers. Once they get to Australia, you can use them to track them once they've served their time. You can they're usually easily searchable nowadays. So you've got a lot of newspapers, early newspapers available through Trove, and there are also databases available for other things. We also have an extensive collection in electronic, microform and print. For Britain, we've got the Times Digital Archive, which is the London newspaper from 1785 to 2010. So if you've got a convict who was trialled in London, you may find a mention in that newspaper. We've also subscribed to 19th century British Library newspapers. So this covers counties outside of London. So again, it can be useful to locate your convict if it's in a different county, and they're keyword searchable. This is an example from the London Times, and it's just for Thomas Dowse, and it's just a mention of all the people who were convicted in that September session. So there you go, 15. And it tells you their crime.
And he was going to be executed?
He was going to be executed. It was... Yeah. So it gives you, even they just give you an insight into what was happening in that time. Edward Mott, he's another early Queensland pioneer who is not known to have been a convict until you start looking for his information. And we'll find out a bit more about him later on. But he was tried in the Gloucester County Sessions, and I found it in the Bristol Mercury down there for stealing a gun. But again, it's just the Gloucester Sessions recorded in the newspaper. Hulk records. So when Thomas Dowse was tried in 16th of September 1824, and he didn't arrive till 1828, where did he go? So that's where you can start looking at the Hulk records. Many convicts were imprisoned on the Hulks awaiting their transportation to Australia. There are quarterly lists of prisoners available on the microfilm between the years 1824 to 1869 as part of the AJCP. Again, we have that upstairs. Something you want to look at, then we can help you locate those records. So I've just referred to the actual booklet that covers that, the Home Office. This is an example of the Holt record. So he was on the Bellerophon. That was his Hulk, and then it just tells you name, age, offence, conviction, his bodily state, behaviour. So he was a good boy. So you can find actually a few references for Thomas Dowse during that time period. The other thing that's very similar to the Hulk records are these prison commission records. So they're available in the AJC Handbook Part 6, which is like a combination of areas. It's also been indexed on microfiche by Western Australian Family History Group, and we have that upstairs, and that'll refer you to microfilm, which we do hold upstairs. So your records provide details for both British and Gibraltar jails, as well as the convict holds, and covers things like minute books, order books, visiting books, calendars of assizes and quarter sessions. The later records might give you a lot more information about exiles. Exiles were often political prisoners, but they were people who had served some of their time in the UK prisons and jails and hulks before they were sent out to Australia. So the information may include name, age, marital status, children, trade, when they arrived and where they came from, their crime, how they disposed of. So you might find their movements from one prison to another before they're sent out to Australia or sent elsewhere. And you get how their behaviour was. The time periods covered are listed there, and again that's in your handout, so I won't necessarily go through that. But we've got a number of prisons covered: Millbank, Pentonville, Portland Prison, Newgate, which is the one near London, as well as Hulk prison ships. Again, this is an example of a commission record. Doesn't have a lot of information, but they're being moved to the Pentonville prison. I've found others which actually refer to the ship that they're going to, and it'll have like VDL, which is Van Diemen's Land. I also have found ones where it says that they have had their sentence commuted or things like that. So they can be a wealth of information. And often the later it is, the more information you're going to find. Next step. The surgeon superintendent's journals. These, as well as giving you a view of ship life, they can also, if your convict was sick, you'll find them listed in them. They're also handy if you're tracing a military person who came out on one of those convict ships. If they got sick, they'll get listed in the convict ship. So it has a dual purpose. So it has gives you adequate, shows you their diet, hygiene, exercise, what type of physical punishment. After 1815, the surgeon superintendents had more formal authority. Prior to that, they were kind of just there to make sure the convicts stayed well enough. They record the health, treatment and survival rates of convicts, and depending on the time period will depend on, and the surgeon will depend on what information is available. So sometimes they might even include watercolour illustration sketches, hand-drawn maps, charts. So it not only provides you with a view of what the convict's life was like on a ship, it provides you with a view of what life was like on a ship. So they're a very useful resource. They can be found as part of they're held at the National Archives of United Kingdom as ADM, which is the Admiralty Office. We hold them, a number of them, as part of the Australian Joint Copying Project, and we would go to the Admiralty Handbook to locate which ship and what date, etc. There is also the miscellaneous series at the website Convict Ships to Australia Medical Journals, which can show you what journals are available, their location within the series, and so on. Also at the National Archives, they have digitised a number of those, and they're available on a particular page called Surgeons at Sea, the Royal Navy Medical Officers Journals. So on that web page, they provide a journal index by the name of both the medical officer, by patient, by ship, or by health matter. And also that the journals can be downloaded, and there's a guide that can show you which bit you need to, because it can be a bit complicated to find. So definitely that guide is useful.
Does that cover 1817 to 57 again, or does it cover earlier ones?
No, it's 1817 to 1857, I believe. This is from the ship that Thomas Dowse came out on, so the Valentia, which arrived in 1828. We have the microfilm, and I've referenced that down here. Just to give you an idea, Thomas Dowse was actually sick while he came out, and he appeared on the daily sick list. So you've got his disease, which is obstipatic, which is to do with constipation. And then you also have this ophthalmic, which was the disease of the eye, so which affected his sight in one eye, which is described back in that indent that we found that he did have eye damage or a loss of sight. So you start to get a picture of your convict. Government gazettes, they're very useful let me rephrase that. So they can help inform the public and the government about absconding convicts, and which includes details of physical description and convict chips. So that's going to be good for those that you are tracing that have reoffended. It'll also list when absconders have been captured, and also the rewards for good conduct, such as the conditional pardons, certificate of leave, certificates of freedom. So they're a good reference to find more links to do with your convict. You'll also get things like unclaimed mail, land acquisitions and transactions. So once your convict has become free, he may then start gaining land. So it helps you track him after he has gained his freedom. So there is an index available by name 1832 to 1868. We've got it on CDs as part of the Australian Genealogical Indexes. It isn't complete, but it does capture quite a few. It's also becoming available through Trove, so it's being slowly digitised and added to Trove. So Trove is also a good place to have a search of the Government Gazette. This is an example of what the CD looks like. This was for Thomas Dowse. So this convict indulgence is going to be like the ticket of leave. And then you can see he got a job, land transactions, etc. So that's covering his life after a convict, being a convict. Okay, once we've established that you have a convict, there are some steps to freedom. So you've got tickets of leave passports, conditional pardons, absolute pardons, and certificates of freedom. So we'll walk through each of those. Ticket of leave had conditions attached to it. So it was a form of parole. A convict could work for his own benefit, but he had to reside within a prescribed area. He had to attend a muster every few months, and he had to attend church weekly. If the sentence was a 7-year sentence, they needed to serve 4 years with one or 5 years with two masters before they could get a ticket of leave. When it was a 14-year sentence, it's 6 years with one, 8 years with two, or 12 years with three masters. So depending on how long they stayed with the particular master, owner, will depend on when they might have got a ticket of leave. People who were sentenced to life, they needed to spend at least 8 years with one master. Thomas Dowse, that's his ticket of leave. Basically covers all the same information that you know. This one actually says that he was a clerk. Probably with his education, that's the next step up. But again, you've got descriptions, and it's all going to be, how much information is on there is all dependent on how much was available when they first arrived. So the earlier the convict, the less information you're going to be able to find. So a ticket of leave won't necessarily add information. You have the ticket of leave passport. New South Wales Government Gazette. So that's a reference of, again, his ticket of leave. So on the index we saw convict indulgence. That's what it would look like in the Government Gazette. So just lists where he is and what should be came out on. Ticket of leave passport allowed a convict permission to move outside the prescribed area. So if they were a well-trusted convict and their owner really trusted them, they would get permission to be able to move cattle from one district to another, for example. A conditional pardon was granted on the condition that the recipient remained in the colony until the original sentence had expired. And this was usually given to convicts sentenced to life. An absolute pardon, on the other hand, remitted the remaining part of a convict's sentence and allowed that free convict to return to Great Britain at his own expense. There is a convict, there are many convicts that have been known to go home, recommit, come back, serve their time, go home, recommit, come back. Our Stephanie Ryan, our senior librarian, has actually written a blog about one of those convicts. So if you're interested in finding out about that convict, let me know and I can show you the blog. So it's interesting to be able to track that sort of information. Certificate of Freedom state, it was a document stating that a convict had served its term. So it was to allow convicts who had served their time to show that they had served their time, and it wasn't provided to convicts who were given life. So convicts who were given life, they had to use the conditional pardon as their documentation that they had served their time. Okay, so convicts, as much as they might be fighting against their nature and recommit. Some people came and they made a life for themselves. Other people didn't survive very well here and were recommitting crimes. So you can find that through jail records, the abscondments, and which would find in the Government Gazettes, punishments, and then being transferred to places of secondary confinements. So the New South Wales court records through the state records of you've got quarter session cases, criminal court records, the bench of magistrates. Some of these microfilms that will be listed in those indexes available on that website can be found here at the State Library. We've tried to get as much early convict records possible pre to separation, because they're going to involve convicts who eventually came to Queensland. Jail records were a good way to find convicts who have reoffended. So they were guilty of a colonial sentence, and that meant that they were eligible for a place of secondary confinement. A good index for this is the index to the Sydney and Darlinghurst jails. Now, our particular convict, Edward Mott, he arrived in 1828 and recommitted a crime. So it provides you with some references. That's his ship that he came out. This is the time period And again, that's going to be the microfilm, which we hold here. And so these are what we call the AO/SR microfilm reels upstairs on level 3. They're the state records. So this is an example of the Darlinghurst entrance books. And they can also be searched through Ancestry, but again, it's a bit more difficult to do. So depends on how computer literate you are. Microfiche is much easier to do that. So you've got a few ways to access it. So there he is down there. There's the sentence, stealing and larceny. Yep. And then you've got your trial dates. It was originally sentenced to death, but it was commuted to being transported to, and that's another reference to it. The newspapers for Australia that would cover a lot of these early convicts, the Sydney Gazette, the Australian, the Hobart Town Courier and the Moreton Bay Courier. All these are available to search on Trove, so they're a good place to look for reoffenders or mentions of getting their ticket of leave. That'll get mentioned often in the newspapers. So now I'm just going to go on to Convicts in Moreton Bay and cover some of the records that we hold here, and then that will give us time for a break and then we'll lead into Saadia. So Moreton Bay was established as a penal settlement for reoffenders in 1824. The 2 convict ships that came out directly were the Mount Stewart Elphinston and the Bangalore. If you do have a convict on either of those ships, I've listed a couple of resources that you can use to consult on that. So there was constant movement in and out of Moreton Bay. So some of the sources I'm going to talk about, we've got a CD-ROM called Index to Colonial Convict Movements. So this includes convicts who are reoffended, people who came free, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So we're then going to cover the Colonial Secretary's correspondence, touch on the Alan Quayle's collection. Then there's the Queensland Early Pioneers Index, and touch briefly on government gazettes and newspapers. So the Index to Colonial Convict Movements, 1826 to 1853. Covers movements of nearly 10,000 convicts and includes, as I said, convicts transported from England or the English territories, as well as colonial convictions, which include people born in the colony, those that came free, and reoffenders. And it indexes microfilm held by the State Records of New South Wales. With the records that we're going to be viewing from now on, we'll be concentrating on Edward Mott. So the CD looks like this when you open it up. You choose the surname that you're looking for, and in our case we were looking for Edward Mott. He had 2 references, one in 1832 where he was moving from Sydney to Moreton Bay. Then in 1839 he moved from Moreton Bay back to Sydney. When you click on one of those links, it takes you to this reference and gives you this lot of information. So tells you the ship that they arrived on, the ship that they were then transported on, the date, the transportation, where they were transported and to where, and then the reference there. So we've got this microfilm here, and it says, and then it talks about other things, so it was properly ironed. Oh, I don't know, yeah. Chain gang, isn't it? Shackles, yeah. So that's just an example of the information that's available. It's probably not the easiest thing to read. but I just wanted to put it up so you had an idea of what it would look like. You've got a letter and then the listing of the convicts that were going. And that's come from the copies of letters sent to the sheriff. The next thing I'm covering is the Colonial Secretary's correspondence. So this can cover things like petitions for mitigation of sentence, you've got permissions to marry, which we talked about earlier, assignments to settlers or public works, details regarding further convictions in the colony. So this works for both convicts and people who've come free. So it's not just a convict resource, it can be used for your other ancestors that might have come. So we hold the Colonial Secretary's papers, 1788 to 1825, which index records held at the State Records of New South Wales. We hold that on microfiche. You can search the index also online through the State Records. We also have Joan Rees's indexes, the New South Wales Colonial Secretary's correspondence, letters sent re-convicts, 1826. And there's also convicts transported to Moreton Bay from New South Wales, 1824 to 31. You can also look at the New South Wales votes and proceedings and the letters received to Moreton Bay, 1822 to 1886. I'm going to concentrate on that particular one because that's something that we hold here. They are records that were, the originals are still at the State Records of New South Wales. In the 1860s, the material was filmed for the State Library. We have an excellent volunteer who has been indexing her heart out for a number of years to make this material freely available. So it's called the Colonial Secretary's Correspondence, indexed to letters received relating to Moreton Bay in Queensland, 1822 to 1860. You can find it at that web address on our homepage, and that's just some of what the web page will look like. You just click on the link that relates to the record that you're wanting to look at. Can also be searched through the internet, through Google, if you put State Library of Queensland AT series and then the name you're looking for. So it covers things, it's a pre-1859 correspondence, so you've got the establishment of the Moreton Bay settlement, you've got dealings with convict and immigrant matters, there's also employment, building construction, sales of land, petitions. So it's going to be useful for both locating a convict who might have been sent up here, as well if they served their time in New South Wales and came up to Australia, you might be able to find just information of their life after sentence. So that's an example of how you would go about searching it through Google. And you would just click on the link which would take you to a PDF. From there you can actually keyword search the PDF and find what you're looking for. If you have any issues, you can sure come and talk to the staff after this talk, or if you want some more information about how to do that. The format of the index is a description of the real number, the letter number, which appears at the top of the letter, and the date. It will also give you the origin of the letter, the content and people involved. As I said, it's keyword searchable and it's a work in progress. So currently we've done 1822 to 1855 and we've done 1859, which we did for the 150 years of separation. And I've actually got another document sitting on my desk that needs to go up, so that'll be more of 1855, I think, into 1856. So we are getting there.
Does that material also cover non-convicts?
Yes. So it's covering any sort of movement into that involved the Colonial Secretary. So it can be land tracts. Yes. So it's not just convicts. Free settlers, soldiers, you get all sorts of things in there. it's been used by a lot of historians. I think Jennifer Harrison used it for the latest book that she released. Someone else used it for their thesis into ginger being introduced in Queensland. So it's a very useful thing for more than just convicts. That's what an example of what the index looks like. There's our Edward Mott, what ship he came on, and his occupation is listed as bricklayer. You can see here that it's a 1838, so it's probably what we were talking about, that there was a mention in the colonial movements earlier about going back to Moreton Bay. This would be that also. So it kind of links well into that CD. And that's an example of the letter. So this is him down here. It gives you you've got the name, the ship, etc., the offence that they occurred, the sentence that they were given, when they were transported up there, and then the reason that they're going back. So his 7 years has expired, so he's allowed to move back. Alan Quayle, what we have of him is this really quite amazing book of convict biographies. Again, it's not complete, but what is there is quite interesting. So it's worth having a look at if you know of a convict that came to Queensland. So we've got the booklet on the level 3 micrographics desk, so you just have to ask the staff there and it can be retrieved from behind the desk. This is just a description of Edward Mott and his sentence and just a bit about what happened. Gives you some references that you can look at. So for example, this here, A2 reels, they're ones that are covered in our A2 series where the previous index has come from. And this Moreton Bay Book of Trials would be the Queensland State Archives. He was just a public servant, and, well, actually Charlie would probably know more than I would.
Alan Quayle was a clerk of petty sessions that went to Cooktown in 1928, and he was placed by the Chief Justice. I'll start again.
Yeah.
Alan Quayle was a clerk of petty sessions who was originally went to Cooktown as a clerk of petty sessions in 1928. He, in 50s to 60s, he was placed here by the Chief Magistrate to research all the material that was here on convicts, police, the law, legislation, anything to do with courts or anything like that, and create all these indexes and books, etc. So there are 2 unpublished books in there on Brisbane from from convict settlement to colony, and then he's done one on the commandant courts. He's done this. There's 6.
Yeah, so there's a huge collection.
There's 10
here.
boxes, which was referred to as research material Alan Quayle.
So there's a lot of duplication within it as well. So, but the important one that I wanted to concentrate on was this Moreton Bay Convicts biography. There's the Queensland Early Pioneers Index created by the Queensland Family History Society. So this was previously known as the Pre-Separation Index. It draws together 75 sources located within Brisbane. Yeah. So we've got it on microfiche and we've got it on CD-ROM. I think it is quite an old index, so some of the references may no longer be available, but it is a really good reference for both convicts and free settlement. So records included are like convict records, administration records like the Colonial Secretary's letters, immigration, law like the Brisbane jail records. You've got land, so title deeds, receipts for deposits. Some of this we're going to hold here, some are going to be like at the Lands Department, some are going to be at the Queensland State Archives. It also refers to the newspapers and welfare like the Moreton Bay Hospital. Edward Mott. He appears in the records from, and then I couldn't get it disorder and order, but the earliest I could find was 1838 when he was still a convict here, up until 1856 when he had returned to Moreton Bay and established himself in the Moreton Bay community as a free man. The references for him, they just list them as numbers here, but if you click on each reference, you get a bit more information. Unfortunately, the information is tiny even when you go and look at it on a computer. So, so it gives you a date, gives you some reference, and this is obviously a Colonial Secretary's reference for the A2 reels. This is just a search that I did through Trove for newspapers for Edward Mott. So it's a way to use the Trove to find our convicts. In this case, he was reoffending. So you've got the reoffending mentioned in the Sydney Herald in 1831. That's over here, and what was listed. And then over here, 1846, was actually the tickets of leave references. So that, in a nutshell, is it, really quickly. So what you need to be aware of is the different time periods for convicts in the various colonies within Australia. There's a wide range of resources available for convicts, online, microform and print. You'll often find that something online will refer you to what we might have here on microfilm. And if you need help finding that information, then we can do that. If you come in with the information or index was already searched, we can help you locate the microfilm. There are differing amounts of information available depending on the time period. For some reason, the further into transportation we get, the more information you're going to get. So they start providing you. But there are, as we've shown, ways that you can find information out. And to stress that Moreton Bay was a penal settlement in 1824, even though it wasn't a direct, they sent a couple of direct ones in 1849. So convicts sent here were going to be mainly reoffenders, so you need to look at those jail records, court records for Queensland. But we'll save the questions till the end. We'll have a 10-minute break, go stretch your legs, have a drink, go to the toilet, and we'll see you back here about 10 past 11.
Okay, welcome back everyone. We may as well start back. So I've got this light shining right in my eyes. It's a little bit glary. So who learnt a lot from Kirsten's talk? So did I. Yeah, I like the, what did we say, was totally ironed? Properly ironed. Yes, we know it means shackles, but I did other visual images of the poor fellow. And just to test your knowledge and see who was paying attention, who remembers what the 4-quarter court sessions were? Very good. That's right. And we know what times of the year they were. So Epiphany is generally around the 6th of January. Easter is anywhere from the last week of March to the first week of April. Midsummer is generally around about Beltane Day is usually about the 6th of June. And then, of course, Michaelmas is your Christmas time. So that's when they met. Good, you all pay attention. Marks, everyone. Everyone's passed that test. Okay, I shall start to talk. So my name's Saadia. I'm the Senior Reference Archivist from Queensland State Archives, and I'll be doing a much shorter talk because we don't have half as much stuff as State Library has on the convict records in our collection and the ways you can use them and the different bits of information that's stored in them and what some of them look like. So, gadget at hand. Has it gone to sleep? Helps when you press the right button. Okay, so an introduction to the Moreton Bay settlement. The first group of convicts arrived on the Amity, and they came from New South Wales. There were 29 convicts, 15 soldiers and their families, in which a couple of the wives were highly pregnant. So within the first month of the colony, they were living in tents. These poor women were giving birth. And the only people to help them were a bunch of convicts and a half-catered staff of soldiers. I really feel sorry for those women. There was a sergeant, a corporal, a storekeeper, and of course the commanding officer, John Oxley, and the assistant surveyor, Lieutenant Butler, and botanist, Alan Cunningham, and of course the ubiquitous servants. So we have to hope that some of those servants are in fact some female servants. The stock included goats, sheep, pigs, poultry, garden seeds and fruit trees. It was a fledgling colony. There was nothing here in European terms. There was no food in European terms. There were, in 1831, convict numbers had reached a maximum, so I think there are around about 1,200 convicts here. And by 1836, the numbers had decreased right down to 350. And by the 1840s, we've got the settlement has changed its purpose, and that the time frame really from by 1839 to 1842, the purpose has changed from that of a penal settlement to the free settlement of Moreton Bay or Brisbane town. And the inhabitants from the late 1830s were really changing the settlement by expanding it, clearing structures, all those sorts of things, building it. But then we had a few issues. Half the population almost starved a few times because they weren't used to the climate. The climate in Brisbane, as we know, is very different to the climate in Sydney, which is extraordinarily different to the climate back in England. So they had to adapt their farming practices to suit. They're nearly starved. And they had a significant issue with labour. There wasn't necessarily a lot of free labour around. So how did they solve this situation? Well, some bright spark came up with the idea, more convicts. So that's why we get the Mount Stuart Elphinston in 1849, the Bangalore in 1850. There are a couple of other ships that were supposed to come directly. I think the Hashmi was one, and I've seen it written as the Rudolph and other times as the Randolph, but for whatever reason, those ships didn't end up in Moreton Bay. They stopped down in Sydney, and the convicts that they had allocated to come to Moreton Bay didn't arrive either. And the reason for that is because the free settlers basically said, we don't want convicts mixing with our good citizens. We'll come up with other issues. So then you've got the 1848 is really the start of the government immigration schemes that come out. We've got Bishop Lang's ships that came out, the Fortitude, the Chaseley and the Lima. And so they come around that labour problem, no more convicts. Poor convicts. So the earliest records that we have, as the slide says, were created by the Military Commandant's Office, the first being Lieutenant Henry Miller, and his appointment was dated the 12th of September in 1824. He was assisted in his administrative duties by civil servants such as Peter Spicer, who was the Superintendent of Convicts. State Library has Spicer's diary, and we have the Book of Monthly Returns, which is also sometimes, or the Book of Labour, which is also sometimes referred to as Spicer's diary. Convicts themselves, if they were well behaved, were appointed as gang overseers and constables if some stayed after their ticket of leave to work in those positions. And one of the most favourite jobs a convict could get was that as the local flogger. Perhaps he could get his own back on the others. And these officers and workers created the earliest Moreton Bay settlement and the earliest records that we have. Oh, I think I went too far then. Get used to the gadget and then get carried away. So probably the most significant point of our convict records we have here in Queensland, those original records that are held at State Library have UNESCO certification. They come under the Memory of the World Register, which is a very hard thing to get. Lots of paperwork involved, but it is a brilliant thing because it highlights the importance of these records from a European context, because they are the earliest people and the reasons why they came here. So it really is that beginning of the history of the European state of Queensland or the colony. How you can find our webpage is if you go onto our website, if you just Google within our website, we have a little funnel back, UNESCO Memory of the World Register, it will pop up with this page. So you can see the certificate. And then we have digital links to the records because they've all been digitised and some other interesting bibs and bobs that are attached to that. You can also search them through Image Queensland, which is sort of like our subset catalogue of images. You can do an advanced search option, just use the words Moreton Bay. It'll ask you if you want to select a decade, just select the first decade that comes up. Like, for example, if you selected 1830 to 1839, you would get images for the female factory, layouts of Brisbane town and some other architectural plans and drawings from the Commandant's office. So depending on which decade you pick will depend on which images you can locate. We also have a dedicated page, aside from the UNESCO Memory of the World page, just for the convict records. They date from 1824 to 1842. Again, they're digitised. So where to start? If you're looking for a convict, and I'll throw this out to everyone, who here already has Australian royalty? Just put your hand up. Quite a few. Who here are hoping to find one? I come from fee settlers, I'm not going to get one. And everyone else is just because it's an interesting topic and you want to learn more about Queensland early history. Yes. Or for other family members, as the lady in the front row said. So where do you start? Well, you can use this page as a start. It's the resource page. It's a good one to start because you've got a few extra things on there aside from the digital links to our images. So if you scrolled down, you'll see there in the section, I'll use this bit instead of pointing my finger. See here it says resources. There are two things there. The first one is the, what's it called? The transcription of Moreton Bay convict records. Now that was done by a very wonderful researcher called Mr. Ken Lamb. He's from Canberra. So he's transcribed a lot of these records. Excuse me. So he detailed the convicts that were sent to Moreton Bay between the period 1824 to 1839. And what that is a list of his spreadsheets with the names of the individuals and the records where he found them and the information about them. And he's very kindly provided a copy of it to Queensland State Archives and has given us permission to share it with the world, which we do. That's why it's on our website. And it's also been made available under Creative Commons licensing. So if any of you go into these library data hack competitions, that's a good one to play with. The other thing we have is the University of Queensland Summer Scholars. So we had 3 students come out. It was about, 4 or 5 years ago now. And what they did, it was a joint University of Queensland and State Archives project called Personal Stories, Perilous Crossings, Multicultural Colonial Queensland 1824 to 1860. And what these summer scholars did was they researched the personal stories of the convicts through the records. And then they did a blog about their research processes, their treasures and discoveries that they found. And then they did a few other things. So if you go to the bottom of this webpage, it'll list them. And they've come up with 4 sort of like mini stories. There's Moreton Bay convict demographics, the long and the short of it. And what they've done is they've created some visual charts and graphs. So they quite literally show our shortest convict, smallest, was about 4'9", and our tallest convict was about 5'10". So literally the long and the short of it. They have things like the skinniest and the roundest, the youngest and the oldest, the men and the women. So all these personal demographics that we humans seem to be intrinsically interested in other people's lives. They did another one called Mary O'Brien, Marianne O'Hara and Mary O'Hara, Personal Stories. Now you have to question, is that one person with 3 names or 3 separate people? Well, if you read it, you'll find out. Matthias Yodi, a personal story. Phoebe Hines, a personal story. And my favourite, Chic Brown, as in oil shake, spelt that way, a personal story. So have a look at those because they've done the research through our records and through other resources to highlight their lives, much how Kirsten did with Edward Mott and Thomas Dowse. And they've made it quite a readable format. The agencies, so they're the creating agencies, the government departments that created the records that are in our collection, include, aside from the Commandant's office, there was the police magistrate in Moreton Bay, so he sort of was founded a little bit later in the scheme of things. He started in the 1840s, I think. Moreton Bay Hospital, because it doesn't matter whether you're a convict, a servant or a soldier, at some point in time somebody got sick and needed some medical assistance. The government resident, so the government resident is like the precursor to the Colonial Secretary, who was the precursor to the Premier. So you've got lots of correspondence. And then, of course, someone had to design all these wonderful stone buildings that they lived in after the tents and then after the Queensland version of the prefab wooden build. So we have the Colonial Architect's office, and he actually worked out of the New South Wales office, but he did get to come up on a regular basis. So they cover the periods 1824 to 1842, and you can search those in the catalogue and then see what series we have under each of the agencies. But if you want to particularly find a convict, you sort of bypass the agencies and you go to this wonderful thing called an index. And it's called the Index to the Chronological Register of Convicts, 1824 to 1839. And the index was originally created by volunteers here at State Library, and then because we have the original record, they then gave us the index, and that's why it's on our website. The index itself is broken into 3 parts, and people often ask why. It's because the original record itself was broken into 3 separate sections. So you've got the chronological register, you have the index to prisoners, and then the alphabetical register of prisoners. So they're the 3 separate sections that all contain slightly different information. The other index we have, which is fairly new, it only went up a month ago, is called the Index to Moreton Bay Monthly and Half-Yearly Returns. It covers 4 different series, which sounds like a lot of records, but it really comes down to a number of pages. So it's a very small little boutique index of a couple of hundred entries, and you will pick up people that were in the hospital, if they were transported as prisoners or as cargo, and you'll find after the 1830s you get these interchangeable words, convicts and prisoners, and so in the archival tanks, convicts tend to refer to those people that were transported out from England, or Great Britain, and a prisoner is someone who their first conviction was here in the colony. They were not retried, so they weren't the recalcitrant prisoners who kept being naughty and kept getting caught. They were the people that were either born here or the free settlers who committed their first offence here. So people often ask, what's the difference? In archival terms, that's what the difference is. So as the convicts literally die out, so does the term, and especially when they stop transporting them. So I have a look at those, and both indexes have links to the digital images, so you can do it freely from home if you've got the internet access. Search the index and then go look at the actual record, and it's all free. So this is what the webpage for the index for the Chron Reg looks like. So our indexes have sort of morphed slightly of recent weeks, so it may look slightly different in that the search the index bit's now at the top and the background information's down at the bottom, but it's actually the same thing. So don't be put off when you go search and think that doesn't look like what Saadia showed us in the talk. It is the same thing, we've just flipped it around because from customer feedback, people like to search the index first and then they'll go back and read what it's actually about later. So it just makes it a bit easier for you to have that self-discovery a bit quicker. So what you'll find is it describes those 3 sections and the information recorded. So in the chronological register, it gives you the name of the prisoner, their age, their offence, where they were tried, so in the Lancaster Seas or in London or whatever, their original conviction, the ship that they sailed out on. And people will say, but why those ships got numbers on them? Because you might see the Emily 3. That prisoner came out in the 3rd voyage of the Emily. That's what that number means. Or Thomas Dowse was on the Florencia 1. He came out in the very first voyage of the Florencia. They might give you, what else is in that one? Their colonial conviction, where they were tried. So obviously most of them tried in Sydney. Then how many years? So did they get 7 years? Did they get 3 years? And then a little bit of information. And then again, how they were disposed of. I just love that, they were disposed. It's a terrible word. So that could mean they died, they absconded, they got a ticket to leave, they were sent back to Sydney. It gives you those descriptions. In the list of prisoners, it quite literally gives you the list of prisoners, and it will give you some physical descriptions about what they look like. Religion, whether they could read or write, have brown hair, blue eyes, grey skin, were they tall, were they short, those sorts of things. And then the alphabetic A to Z of prisoners, it sort of replicates a bit of those other 2, but you might get some slightly different comments in. So it pays to look in each 3 sections. So that's what the page looks like. Oh, and the people that died, of course, as well. The other one that we have is the half-yearly returns. Again, it's not necessarily totally about convicts, it's about everyone that was here. So it covers the soldiers, their families, the convicts, the servants, and everyone else. It's a very small one. I think I've got what the index looks like. So this is what the index will look like. So you can search the name, and then the activity will point you as to which section, which digital record you need to look at. So some come under the hospital, some come under the births, deaths and marriages, some will come under the prisoners transported, and some are listed as passengers. So if they were a passenger, they obviously weren't a convict. The other thing to remember too is when you're looking at some of the ones where they're the lists of cargo, convicts was sometimes just listed as cargo. So it might just say Lieutenant Greville and family, 6 servants, and then under cargo it might say so many bushels of wheat, so many pigs, 24 convicts. So you're not going to get their names. So just you need to be aware of that. And then what you would do, you click on the digital link, take a note of your page, and then lo and behold, you have the image to look at. Other records that we have, won't read out the whole list, but they're there. There's a small number of them. That's pretty much most of it. We have about a dozen registers all up that deal, because it's pre-separation, you'll find the majority of convict-related records are held in New South Wales or back in Great Britain. So the few that we have survived give details of the daily lives of the convicts, their guards and other persons in the fledgling colony. We know who was born, who died, who married, their illnesses, the work they undertook, their crimes, and some of their crimes these days really, that was a crime, and they were given death penalties for them and commuted. It just makes your little toes curl. And I reckon Thomas's Dowse's mother was just chewing her fingernails down to the quick, waiting for that to be commuted to life. How bad did she feel? Who here has ever had a 15-year-old teenage boy? Yeah, we can see it from both sides, can't we? I love my son, but seriously, they have moments of attitude and gratitude. So you can, maybe she was trying to teach Thomas Dowse a lesson, and that would be the backfire of the millennia, I think. We learn what their punishments were, and then when they were let off lightly. We can see what resources were available. And when we talk about resources, it's not about the records, it's about what actually existed in the colony. The quarrying. We know that convicts were sent out to be fence splitters, so they were harvesting wood. We know that convicts absconded and the local Indigenous populations took pity on them and fed them, so they learnt where Indigenous food resources were, where water sources were. So that's what they mean when they talk about resources. We know what the colony looked like from the maps that were drawn and some of the early sketches and paintings that were done. In the 1820s, the surveyors were sent out, so off they went. Go forth and document what you find. And they had these little field notebooks, and they were called trigonometrical survey books or field survey books that they could fit in their back pocket. And what they would do, so we have the earliest ones we have are from the surveyor Hoddle, who did the settlement of Redcliffe, because Redcliffe was actually the first convict spot before they came further down to Brisbane town. They would do little drawings, so they would do the schematics, all their survey points and things like that, but they also do drawings of what the landscape looked like. So have a look, they're not digitised, but they're some of the most wonderful little gems that we have at State Archives that you can look at and see. And they'll write comments, came across some Aborigines today, they were fishing, they showed me what to do, things like that. Or alternatively, they may use terminology which we find offensive in the day and age, but it is what it is. Look at it and they might say, they were not quite so friendly and they threw spears at me and I ran away and hid. But you get this information about the interactions with the local peoples, not just the convicts and the surveyors by these travels around Queensland. We don't have photos, but we do have these really good descriptions through a lot of the records, whether they're the things held through the Australian Joint Copying Project. We do have some of that back at State Archives, but seriously, come to State Library to use it because you've got the staff here who know it very well. We tend to have it as a value-added resource in our search room, and I can tell you probably only two of the archivists and the public service team, public access team, have actually really had any in-depth work on them. So come to State Library to use the AJA, Australian Joint Copying Project material, and because yours is complete, isn't it, Kirsten? For Queensland anyway, whereas ours is just piecemeal, and they've got all the resources and other books and that here. But have a play, have a look at it. As we talk about the convict ships that came directly to Queensland, the two that we know actually made it, they do turn up in the newspapers. We know the Mount Stewart Elphinstone had 225 convicts and the Bangalore had 302. So you've got well over 500 bodies have arrived. The free settlers that arrived only just before them on the Fortitude and the Chaseley were apparently very verbal in their disquiet about the colony receiving convicts, deeming they were to be unsuitable residents. So because the free settlers kicked up quite a stink, the Bangalore was the last one to come. So it's probably the reason why the Rudolph/Randolph ended up not coming up and stayed in New South Wales. So the last transportation and the last convicts to hit Queensland were on the Bangalore. And how do we know this? Because we actually found some documents. If you go through our card catalogue called the Index to Ships, it goes from 1828 thereabout to 1923 is the rough date range for that card catalogue. And you will find, if you look up the name of the ship, you will find these references. So RES stands for resident, as in the government resident, so they're correspondents. And then CCL is actually the Commissioner of Crown Lands, because a lot of these convicts actually ended up, once they got the ticket of leave, ended up almost like in the land order scheme. They ended up going out to land either to work for someone or to end up taking up land. So you do get these references. We don't have many, but they are there. So if you go to that Index to Ships catalogue, you will get the full references. I'll give you the microfilm numbers and the pages to look at. And now for what some of our records actually look like. This is from the Book of Trials, and this is where you get to read the backstories and read between the lines of what these records actually say. So the convicts did have it very hard and was very harsh. You'll often find that one or two people, so the local commandant was pretty much judge and jury, and no matter what the convicts said, he pretty much wasn't believed. This is an extract. There are two here. One's insubordination, and he gets 50 lashes, and the other one is for stealing potatoes. He also gets 50 lashes. The insubordination one, if you ever get to read it, it's really rather funny. Basically, he tells someone to get nicked, but not quite so polite terms. So he got 50 lashes for that. And is that the one where he'd been drinking as well? There's another one where they were out rowing all day in the stinking heat of February out in Moreton Bay, and after 3 hours of rowing around, basically they put their oars down and going, we're not going to row no more, we're going to have a drink and a rest, and they all got 50 lashes. Bit mean, but on with the convicts on that one. 50 hours, crikey. 50 lashes for 3 hours, terrible. But with the potatoes one is about Mr. Petrie, and that's Mr. Andrew Petrie, who I used to think was really cool until I read this, and then I decided he wasn't very cool at all. What it is, it's a copy of a witness statement that was given by Mr. Petrie, in this case of stealing potatoes, and Mr. Petrie, quote, swears, Mr. Petrie sworn states the prisoner is my gardener and lives in the garden, having the entire charge of it. Yesterday morning about 9 o'clock, I met a prisoner of the name McGrath, one of the pilot's crew, with a quantity of potatoes in a blanket. I am sure he must have been coming from my garden, as there are no other potatoes in that direction. I thought, when I saw the potatoes, that they were given to the coxswain of the pilot boat. I afterwards discovered they were not. So he must therefore have taken them without my permission. So straight away, Mr. Petrie's assumed that this guy stole the potatoes. So he's already written him off. James McGrath, who's the poor guy that was about to get 50 lashes, sworn states that the potatoes in the blanket, which I was carrying yesterday, I received from Mr. Petrie's gardener. They were given to me by him for the purpose of obtaining some straw to make a hat. So he was found guilty of stealing because Mr. Petrie didn't want to share his potatoes. We don't know who the hat was for, whether the hat was for James McGrath or someone else, but basically he got 50 lashes. Now they used the cat o' nine tails, so they were, it was like a handle. It had long lengths of cord on it, and they had knots on them. And they tore skin from your body, and they were pretty vicious. So he got 50 lashes for that. Now, the gardener, it says he had entire charge of the garden, so that might assume that perhaps it was he had the leeway to give food away from the garden, perhaps for a job to be done. That's the implication when you read it, but Mr. Petrie didn't want to share his potatoes. And the reason behind that is because food was very scarce. People were starving, so when resources are very scarce, people become very protective. And obviously he didn't want to share with a convict. So this poor man got 50 lashes because he had some potatoes in a favour, and he didn't get the lashes for the blanket. He got the lashes for the potatoes. Think about that. This is another one. Doesn't come up terribly well. That's because the original record is very much like that. This is a register of cases and treatment, the Moreton Bay Hospital. We are currently in the process of indexing it, and it will be linked to the digital images, so keep an eye out for that one very soon. It's chronological by date of admission, and most registers include a name index either at the front of the book or at the back of the book, but not all of them do. The register keeps people... it lists the registers of cases and treatment kept by the Moreton Bay Penal Settlement Hospital, which later became the Brisbane Hospital. It includes entries for the patient's name, so you do get convicts and prisoners in here because obviously they were too ill to be kept where they were, so they had to get hospital treatment. You get their name, age, the date admitted, disease and treatment. Under the headings for diseases and treatment, there may be chronological entries that relate to the patient's ongoing condition and treatment. A lot of the prisoners seem to spend the night in hospital. Now, probably because it was a little bit more comfortable than back in the barracks, but there are other reasons too. Because of what the convicts suffered from. So if they suffered from epilepsy, it was something that was not very well understood in that period of time or very well treated. So they would allow, there's one prisoner who is allowed to sleep in the hospital every night because he suffers from severe epilepsy, and he has a few other medical conditions as well. And it just means that the medical staff are allowed to keep an eye on him so he doesn't have to sleep in the barracks. So they were actually concerned about his welfare, which is a good thing. The treatment is very interesting. A lot of them are put on milk and rum diets, not necessarily together. Yeah. Or porridge diets and things like this, because a lot of convicts and probably a lot of members of the general public seem to suffer from severe constipation and bowel obstruction on a very regular basis. Or it's complete opposite. Trip to the loo, they've got dysentery. So they have major issues. Part of that's the health and hygiene of the period, but a lot of it's to do with the diet. They didn't have refrigeration. You can join the dots. But you do get some very interesting insights into the convicts anyway, and some of the soldiers. So you'll often find when something went through the barracks, it didn't just affect the convicts. The soldiers end up in hospital with the same problems as well. So and you'll notice that it's often written sometimes in Latin, like the days. So this is Wednesday, di Mercury or D Mercury, and the date. The other ones we have are the survey plans, charts and maps of Moreton Bay settlement in Queensland. That's series 4314, and it dates from 1802 to 1889. Why they date 1802 is because that's the date of the Admiralty charts that's stamped on it. So they could be copies that were later used, but they certainly weren't created in Queensland in 1802 because there was nobody here that was of European descent. The series comprises of a collection of original plans, charts and maps. There are copies that were done at that time frame. They're from the pre-penal settlement post-separation, and they cover the explored and settled areas of Moreton Bay settlement, the coastal regions of Queensland. Most of the collection covers the pre-sep period, but they include both land and nautical survey maps, so you really do get quite a picture of what Queensland looked like in that period. This particular drawing, it's item ID 714392, it's not shown on there. It's a plan of Brisbane town. It was drawn to accompany a report that was dated the 8th of May 1839 by G.W. Barney, who was a major. The copy was printed at the Survey Office in 1904. It shows the Commandant's quarters. So you see these little outbuildings and they'll have numbers on, and then you look at the references and the number tells you what the building was. So they're broken up. Number 1 was the Commandant's quarters. So can everyone see where number 1 is over here? So that's the Commandant's quarters there. You've got number 2 is the Commandant's garden, and it contained 4.5 acres. Then number 3, anyone see number 3? It's vacant ground. And then it goes on to list, we've got the commissariats, officers' quarters, their gardens. So each building has its own garden, so they could grow their own food supplies. You've got the chaplain's quarters. We've got the police and commissariat officers. We have the boat builder's hut for the crew, the clerk's quarters. We have barns, the piggery, the stockyard, guard houses, soldier's garden, officer's garden. 21, can anyone see where 21 is? Because I can't see it on this angle. There's 20 there, is the female factory. They worked out they had to keep it a bit further away because despite all their best efforts to keep the girls in and the boys out, guess what happened? Apparently they used to have issues with men regularly jumping the pointed fence to get to the ladies. So what happens when you have too many boys in one place? We've got lumber yards. 23 is the military hospital. 24 is the convict hospital. So this is pre-Brisbane hospital. And then it goes on, we've got solitary cells, the prisoners' barracks, but all in all, and of course our windmill, which is up on Wickham Terrace. And all, there are 36 numbered items on the map. So we have a few copies of it. And I like how the trees all grow neatly in a row. That's the fruit part of the fruit garden. Because remember I said when the Amity came, they bought fruit trees and plant seeds. So other resources, as Kirsten went through before, the letters received at Moreton Bay, just to recap that. And then if you go through their website and look at their resources for family history, you'll get a lot of those letters. And I won't go through all the other ones because Kirsten already did that earlier. But if you have a knowledge of our convict came out, we think we know the ship's name, there is a really good website and it's called convictrecords.com.au and allows you to search the ship by name. And what they give you is transcription of all the records. So it does the hard work for you. You don't have to try and read the rather interesting colonial script, copperplate writing, the neat and the not so neat. So it's all been done for you. And it will give you details like how many life sentences there were, the number of prisoners that were on there, how many got 7-year sentences, the ratios of males and females, a bit of the history about the voyage. So they're really an interesting insight. And a whole heap of volunteers from, I take it, around the world have contributed to this particular website. And just have a play is what I suggest. Have a play on our indexes and our websites, see what you can find. Remember, just like that wonderful TV show, you have options. You can phone a friend, ask a reference archivist. When we say phone a friend, we want you to phone us or State Library. Ask a reference archivist or one of the reference librarians and staff here at State Library. Wing it. Have a go yourself, because so much is digitised these days and freely available. Even if they are on paid websites like Ancestry and Find My Past, if you go to your local library, most local, especially here in Brisbane, the Brisbane City Council Library Service have paid subscriptions to those two commercial entities, and their staff can help you. And you can also access them here through State Library. We don't have them at State Archives yet. I'm working on it. But have a go. So what we might do now, everyone feel that they've learnt a lot today? You're all really keen to go and do more research? Come and visit us. And remember, at State Archives, we do have the free taxi service on Tuesdays from the Fruitgrove train station. So you just phone our reception, which is 3131 7777. That phone number will work till the end of the year. And you just book your place, but it's totally free. So what I might do now is throw it over to you guys. If any of you have any questions, now's your time to pick my brains or Kirsten's, and just wait for the microphone to come to you before you start talking. And that way everyone can hear, and because we're being videoed, it allows the YouTubers in time to hear it as well. First question.
Yes, look, I'm really just starting, but I went back to an ancestor that appeared to come out on a convict ship, but she was aged 2. So I wanted to see what the situation was with family, the relatives of the convicts, and did they come on the convict ships, or were they...
Yes.
How did it work, basically?
Yes, they did. If they were a child, the child obviously wasn't a convict, but their mother probably was. So, shameless plug here for Jennifer Harrison's latest book on, what's it called? I can't remember. Isn't that terrible? I saw it. It's about female convicts. And what you'll find is that if the female convicts were pregnant or had babes in arms, because you would nurse a child until it was up to 4 years of age in that period of time, it was quite common, they could bring their children with them. And then after a certain amount of time, they would separate the children, would go off to the orphanages, and unless the mothers finished their service or whatever. But you will find that's quite common for a child will travel with their mother on the convict ship, although they're not a convict themselves. What was the name of that author? Dr. Jennifer Harrison. So if you Google, and it's, I can't think of the exact title, but it's about tracing female convicts. Yeah, if you go down the library bookshop, they've got it because it's only just come out in the last month and a half. And she traces the female convicts that pretty much came to Queensland, a lot of them being Irish. But she goes into detail in her book about when the children came with them, what they did. The women that offended purely as a means of transportation to get out here, to have a different life, because especially the Irish, because you've got famine happening, people couldn't get work and things like that. So people didn't just come because they were actually dirty, rotten scoundrels and did the naughty thing. It was sometimes seen as an avenue to immigration. Bit of a bullet to dodge, though. Any other questions? A lady had a hand up before.
I was just wondering what happened to the potatoes.
Potatoes?
Yes, what happened to the potatoes?
Well, I think they were probably eaten. Much like Breaker Morant's larceny of a pig, there was no evidence at the end of it because he ate it. So that's why, that's what makes that case so unfair, because basically it's just Andrew Petrie's word against a convict. And no one was going to believe whatever the convict said, no one was going to believe him. That's what makes him so mean. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'd come across some information that the mother and sister in London had applied for clemency. And the reference said that you could buy it or you could have it researched at Q for £25, which I don't particularly want to do. Would that similar information be available in Australia?
For the original conviction or a colonial? We won't have it for the original conviction unless they made it here.
The convict was here, and the mother, after a period of time, the mother in England applied for clemency, apparently.
Joint copying project letters?
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe in the AJCP stuff as correspondence, but really if it happened in England, you're going to have to go to England.
Okay.
And the request for clemency could have been that, dad had died, mum was frail and needed help with the other children. They usually were a family-based matter while they asked for it. Women could also claim clemency because they were pregnant, but it only bought them time. So what they would do is they'd commute the sentence. So if you were given a hanging sentence and you went, oh, I'm pregnant, okay, you're now commuted, because they wouldn't take the life of an unborn child. But it didn't stop you from being transported. They'd just wait a period of time, and if you survived the hocks, then they'd transport you.
Mm-hmm. Now, I came a little bit late, but also this convict was assigned to the wife.
Because she would have been used as a domestic servant for the wife. So
it was a male convict.
It was a male convict. Well, it still happened. So he may have been, the wife may... Usually when you look at how the households were run, the women looked after inside the house, so they might need someone a male to be chopping the wood and helping them look after the vegetable garden. Whereas the husband would have labourers to help with the really heavy stuff, the fencing, the splitting, the stock, the clearing, all that sort of thing. So that's why you will sometimes see them assigned to either the husband or a wife. Usually the women got female servants to help in the house. But you think of all those jobs, so if you think of the industry of service, all those jobs in a house that men used to do. So it's not unusual.
So I'm just imagining that they arrived in Sydney and virtually lived as husband and wife again because they subsequently had 2 more children.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Not everyone got married.
No.
They still don't these days.
But he obviously wasn't in a prison, as I would have imagined. That
if they were well behaved, everyone still went to the local lockup. But if they were of reasonably good character, their behaviour was good. I mean, you've only got to watch the historical dramas that they have on TV, like Timeless Land and what was that one they had last year? Something about the river. The Secret River and things like that. So what would happen was the local landholders or the free peoples would go up to the prison, and that would be like the labour gangs. They'd get out the prisoners that were reasonably trustworthy or they had skills, because a lot of the prisoners that came out you find were tradespeople. And the reason why they were stealing, because back in England you've got the social fabric behind a lot of the transportations to Queensland or to Australia is you've got the end of the Napoleonic Wars, so you've got all these people that are out of work, including soldiers. There was a massive volcanic eruption around 1816, which actually caused what we'd consider like a nuclear winter, in that the ash cloud covered the world, and so they had 2 winters where they lost crops right across Europe. So people were starving, they were unemployed. So what do you do to feed your family? You nick things. Mainly you nick food or you nick clothes. That's what most of the people that came out to Australia actually did. So larceny is stealing something and trying to fence it off. So make a quid so you can buy something else. You look at those things. So those people had skills because a lot of them were tradespeople. You use those trades. So you'd go along. So Mr. Bloggs, he needs a couple of people to clear his land and do a few other things. He goes along to the local prison. He says, can I have some labour? And they'd go, okay. And you'll see it if you look at our labour records for State Archives, in that they've got the Book of Daily Labour. And so they assign convicts to different jobs. So they might be in the kitchen, in the bakers, they might be fencers, splitters, dairymen, they might be working with the crops, they might be harvesting. So that's what they do. And the wife says, oh, by the way, John, I need someone to help me with the garden. Oh, okay, we'll get him, you can assign that one to the wife. So that's sort of how it would have worked. Mm-hmm. And we know that from diary records that you can find down at Mitchell Library and through correspondence that you can find here through State Library where they talk about these things. Not to mention shameless ABC and BBC productions. They're not really shameless, they're actually really very good.
They also cover that.
A lady, just bring down the microphone for you so everyone else can hear.
I've just been doing the University of Tasmania family history course thing, which is really brilliant, by the way. But they were talking about that a lot, that they got the blokes in to help the women lift washing baskets and all that sort of stuff, because it was really heavy work. Yeah, but that course is really good, by the way. And the first 4 subjects are free if you're an Aussie, which is even better.
Brilliant. Yeah, so with washing, not like today where you just whack it in the front loader and off you go for an hour. They had big coppers and boilers. So you find when you go through inquest records in those periods, lots of children died from scalding because they ran through the laundries and the coppers tipped over and they were burnt to death, quite literally by boiling water. Lots of injuries where the women would catch on fire because their hemlines would catch the fire that's under the copper, because they used to boil. That's how they cleaned their clothes. They boiled them and got the dolly and pushed it down. Their skirts would catch on fire. It's really hard.
You can also
chopping wood.
You can also find that convicts could request for their family to come out. So once their family come out, they'd be coming out free. So then the husband could then be assigned to his wife.
That's another one, yeah. And as you said, they could just reassume their married life as they were. Any other questions?
I have a convict who came out in 1837. He arrived on the Prince George in Sydney. All the rest of his records, his ticket of leave and marriage and so forth, are all in Manaroo in the Snowy Mountains. I have got no way so far of finding how he came from Sydney to Manaroo, why. The muster records for 1841 doesn't have that particular name in it. The K records are missing. Where would I find something that would say why he went from Sydney to the Snowy Mountains, and any information about who he'd be working for or something like that?
You might find something in the New South Wales Government Gazettes there, and we also have an index upstairs. I'm just not sure of the dates of convicts and employers, and that has, I'm sure it covers 1837, but I think then it's later dates, but that's based on the Gazettes as well. So they will list, so-and-so was assigned to so-and-so.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So that's an option.
Sorry, just to that, you might find something...
Can you just wait a minute and we'll get the microphone up there?
You might find something with the Colonial Secretary's papers.
Yeah, those
because
letters,
they sort of have letters about people. They actually have local letters of complaint to people back to the government about convicts assigned to particular families who basically they know were misbehaving, as in stealing sheep from the neighbours and cutting them up, and they'd get reassigned. So, and that's all in the Colonial Secretary's papers.
There you go.
Never.
There's the Joan Rees indexes, which are indexed in Colonial Secretary's papers, some of which we would hold here, others are referenced to ones that are held at the state records.
When in doubt, always check out the Colonial Secretary, because if anyone wanted to complain, that's the person they wrote to, or if they wanted to ask help. So that they are a really good resource, not just for convicts, for anything and everything. And most of the registers, whether they're the New South Wales ones or the Queensland ones, you'll have an A to Z alphabet at the back by the person who wrote the letter, and they'll also have a subject grouping. So you can look under subject, so if you know you're looking for a particular convict, look under that. If you know that John Smith wrote the letter, look under John Smith. If you have a knowledge that they were writing between the different departments for the colony, most of the registers will have tabs that relate to the different departments that they have. So you'd be looking for superintendent, the commandant, something like that for the prison, or comptroller of prisoners, things like that. So you can always try there as well.
Okay, we might leave it there. Feel free to come up to the micrographics desk. There will be staff up there that can help you. Otherwise, have a good day.
Thank you for coming. Now, how do we turn this off?